It was an ordinary morning in the bustling city, where the hum of engines and the chatter of commuters filled the air. Among them, Charlie, a middle-aged bus driver, prepared to begin his shift. Charlie was a kind-hearted man, known for his patience and warm smile, always greeting passengers as they boarded his bus. Yet, that day would become anything but ordinary. As the bus rolled down its usual route, stopping at corners to pick up passengers, Charlie noticed a young girl standing alone at the edge of the sidewalk near the upcoming stop. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her small frame bundled in an oversized pink jacket. Something about her caught Charlie's attention. A subtle shake in her hands, the way she nervously glanced around, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. When the bus came to a halt, Charlie opened the doors with a familiar hiss. The little girl hesitated for a moment, her tiny feet glued to the pavement. Charlie leaned out of his seat and spoke gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. Are you getting on?" His voice was calm, soothing, the kind of tone that made anyone feel safe. The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, her wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto Charlie's face. Without warning, she bolted up the steps, clutching a small stuffed bear to her chest as though it was the only thing tethering her to this world. Her cries were soft but heart-wrenching, and they echoed through the quiet bus. Charlie quickly scanned the area outside, looking for a guardian or anyone who might have accompanied the child. But there was no one, just the empty street behind her. His concern deepened. "Where are your parents?" he asked, kneeling slightly to meet her eye level. The little girl shook her head, her sobs making it difficult for her to speak. "Please, don't let them take me back," she finally choked out. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried a desperation that sent shivers down Charlie's spine. Before he could respond, the other passengers on the bus began murmuring amongst themselves, their curiosity piqued by the unusual scene unfolding before them. Charlie raised a hand to quiet them, his focus solely on the girl. "Take you back? Back where? Who's trying to take you?" he asked gently, hoping to make sense of her words. The girl wiped her tears with the sleeve of her jacket, but her fear was palpable. She clutched the stuffed bear tighter, as if it might shield her from whatever she was running from. "I don't want to go back to them," she said, her voice cracking with fear. Charlie's heart ached at the sight. "Okay," he said softly. "No one's going to make you go anywhere you don't want to. You're safe here. Just tell me what's wrong, and we'll figure it out together." For a moment, the girl seemed to calm, as if she could sense the sincerity in Charlie's words. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything further, a sharp screech of tires echoed from behind the bus. Charlie glanced in his rearview mirror and noticed a black SUV pulling up fast. The vehicle came to a sudden stop, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out. Charlie's instincts kicked in. Something about the way the men moved, their stiff posture, the way they scanned the bus like hunters searching for prey, set off alarm bells in his mind. He stood protectively in front of the girl, who clung to his leg now, her small fingers gripping his pant leg as if letting go would mean losing everything. "Stay calm," Charlie whispered to her, his eyes never leaving the men outside. One of the men approached the bus door and knocked loudly, his expression stern and unyielding. Charlie hesitated but eventually pressed the button to open the door. "Good morning," the man said curtly, his eyes scanning the bus as though he already knew what or who he was looking for. "We're with Child Services. We need to speak to the little girl you just picked up. She's run away from her foster home." "Foster home?" Charlie's gaze shifted to the girl, whose grip on his leg tightened. Her tears began to flow again, and she shook her head furiously. "They're lying," she cried out. "They're not from Child Services. Please don't let them take me." Charlie's stomach churned. Something about the men's demeanor felt off. Too cold, too calculated. The little girl's fear wasn't the kind that came from misunderstanding. It was raw, visceral, the kind that came from experience. He straightened his back and looked the man in the eye. "Do you have any identification to prove who you are?" he asked firmly. The man's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, His professional facade cracked. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a badge and holding it up for Charlie to see. But the badge looked generic, almost too pristine, as if it had been freshly printed. "I don't know," Charlie said, stalling for time. His mind raced as he tried to decide what to do. The girl's sobs grew louder, her tiny voice pleading, "Please, please don't let them take me. They're bad people." And then, she uttered 4 words that sent a chill down Charlie's spine. "They hurt my mommy." Charlie felt his chest tighten at the little girl's words. "They hurt my mommy." Her voice echoed in his mind, each syllable sharpening his instincts. He glanced at the 2 men outside, their cold expressions showing no sign of compassion. Something was deeply wrong, and every fiber of his being screamed that this child was in danger. The taller of the 2 men stepped closer, leaning against the doorframe of the bus. "Sir, we're here to take the child back to a safe location," he said with forced patience, his eyes darting toward the little girl. "Hand her over, and we'll take care of the rest." But Charlie didn't move. His years behind the wheel had taught him how to read people. Passengers in a rush, regulars carrying burdens they didn't talk about, the occasional troublemaker looking for a fight. And these men? They weren't concerned caregivers. They were predators hiding behind suits. "I'm sorry," Charlie said, standing taller, "but I'm not convinced. If you're with child services, then the police should be involved. I'll need to call this in before I do anything." The taller man's calm demeanor slipped. His face hardened, and he reached into his pocket, pulling out a phone. "There's no need to escalate this," he said sharply. "We're authorized to act in the best interest of the child. If you delay, you'll be obstructing our work." But Charlie wasn't about to back down. He turned to the passengers, most of whom were now watching intently, their murmurs filling the bus. "Does anyone here know how to contact child services directly?" he asked. An older woman sitting near the front raised her hand timidly. "I do. My daughter works for them. I can call her right now." The shorter man outside took a step forward, his face reddening with frustration. "This isn't necessary. We're handling this." "It's necessary," Charlie replied firmly. "We'll wait until I get confirmation from someone I trust." The little girl tugged at Charlie's sleeve, her voice trembling. "They're not going to wait. They'll try to take me no matter what." Charlie's blood ran cold at her words. He could feel the tension thickening. He crouched down to her level, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I won't let that happen," he whispered. The taller man, now visibly agitated, took a step closer to the bus door. "This is your last warning," he barked. "Hand over the child, or there will be consequences." A quiet hush fell over the passengers. The threat hung heavy in the air. Charlie straightened up and positioned himself between the men and the little girl. "Then I'll deal with the consequences," he said evenly. "But this bus isn't moving until we get answers." The standoff grew more intense by the second. The older woman who had offered to call child services whispered urgently into her phone, her voice trembling. "Yes, there's a situation. No, it doesn't feel right. Please hurry." The men exchanged a glance, their patience clearly wearing thin. Then, without warning, the shorter man lunged forward, his hand reaching for the girl. But Charlie was ready. He slammed the door shut with a loud hiss, the lock engaging just as the man's hand struck the glass. The passengers gasped, and the girl let out a terrified cry. "Stay calm," Charlie shouted, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He turned to the passengers. "Someone call the police now." Outside, the 2 men were shouting, banging on the door. The taller one pulled out a phone, pacing furiously as he spoke into it. The shorter man glared at Charlie through the glass, his face twisted in anger. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was electric. The passengers, who moments ago had been passive observers, were now fully engaged. A man near the back stood up, his phone pressed to his ear. "I've got 911 on the line," he said loudly. "They're sending someone." Charlie nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "Good. Let them know we're at the corner of 8th and Main. And tell them it's urgent." The little girl sat trembling in the seat closest to Charlie, her tiny hands clutching the stuffed bear. "I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Charlie crouched down again, his tone softer this time. "You're doing great, sweetheart. Just stay with me, okay? No one's going to hurt you." Her eyes, wide and filled with tears, searched his face for reassurance. "They said they'd take me, and I'd never see my mommy again." Charlie's heart ached. "What happened to your mom?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, then looked down at the bear in her lap. "They came to our house," she said quietly. "They said my mommy owed them money. She told them to leave, but they hurt her. And then they said they'd come back for me." Charlie felt a wave of anger surge through him. These men weren't just lying about their identity, they were dangerous. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Blue and red lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter as the police cars approached. Relief swept through the bus, and the passengers began to cheer quietly. The two men outside turned, their expressions shifting from anger to unease. The taller one grabbed his colleague by the arm, muttering something before they both began retreating toward their SUV. But before they could get in, two police officers emerged from one of the squad cars, their hands resting on their holsters. "Stop right there," one of the officers commanded. Charlie opened the bus door slightly, just enough to speak to the officers. "These men claim to be with Child Services," he explained quickly. "But the little girl says otherwise. She says they hurt her mom." The officer nodded, his eyes narrowing as he approached the two men. "Identification. Now," he demanded. The taller man hesitated, then reluctantly handed over his badge. The officer examined it closely, his face hardening. "This isn't real. Step away from the vehicle." The little girl peeked out from behind Charlie, her eyes widening as the officers cuffed the men. "Are they going to jail?" she asked softly. "They will," Charlie assured her. "And they won't hurt you or your mom again." As the officers led the men away, Charlie finally exhaled. He turned to the little girl, who managed a small, brave smile. For the first time, she looked like she believed she was safe. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street as more police officers arrived at the scene. The tension on the bus eased slightly, but Charlie remained on high alert, his gaze fixed on the little girl. She clung to the stuffed bear, her small frame trembling despite the reassurances of the passengers around her. "Officers, please, we need to check on her mother," Charlie urged, stepping off the bus to speak with the lead officer. The officer, a tall woman with a commanding presence, nodded briskly. "We've dispatched an ambulance to the address she mentioned. If what she's saying checks out, her mother might be in immediate danger." Charlie glanced back at the bus, his chest tightening as he thought of the girl's words. "They hurt my mommy." He couldn't shake the thought of what might be happening to the child's mother at that very moment. Inside the bus, the passengers huddled around the girl, their protective instincts kicking in. An older woman offered her a bottle of water, while a younger man reassured her with a gentle tone. "You're so brave, sweetheart," he said. "We're all here to help you." The little girl nodded faintly, her eyes darting toward the window where the two men, now handcuffed, were being questioned by the police. Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. "They were going to take me far away. They said my mommy would never find me." One of the passengers, a middle-aged man in a business suit, frowned deeply. "This is more than just a random kidnapping. These guys seem organized." Outside, the taller of the two suspects was growing visibly agitated as the officer questioned him. "I told you," the man snapped. "We were acting in the child's best interest." The officer's jaw tightened. "With a fake Child Services badge? You're not fooling anyone. Now tell me, who sent you?" The man hesitated, his eyes darting to his accomplice, who was now slumped against the side of the squad car. "I want a lawyer," he said finally, clamming up. The officer exhaled sharply and turned to her colleague. "Search their vehicle. Let's see what they're hiding." As the police began their search, Charlie returned to the bus, his heart heavy with concern. He knelt down beside the little girl, his voice soft. "Sweetheart, Do you know where your mom might be right now? Any place she might have gone to stay safe. The girl shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. She was at home when they came. She told me to hide in the closet. But I heard them yelling. And then she screamed. The weight of her words hit Charlie like a punch to the gut. He exchanged a glance with the older woman near the front of the bus, who was still on the phone with her daughter. They need to hurry, the woman said urgently. If this child's mom is hurt. Suddenly, one of the officers called out from the suspect's SUV. Found something. The crowd on the bus grew quiet, their attention shifting to the scene outside. Charlie craned his neck to see as the officer emerged, holding a black duffel bag. He unzipped it carefully, revealing bundles of cash, forged documents, and a small tablet. The officer holding the tablet powered it on, her face darkening as she scrolled through its contents. This is a trafficking operation, she muttered, loud enough for Charlie to hear. The words sent a chill through him. He turned back to the girl, his protective instincts roaring to life. You're safe now, he promised her. They won't touch you again. But the girl's expression didn't soften. What about my mommy? She whispered, her voice breaking. Before Charlie could respond, the officer who had examined the tablet approached the bus. Sir, she said to Charlie, we need to move quickly. We believe this girl's mother may still be in danger. Do you have her address? Charlie nodded and turned to the girl. Do you remember where you live? The girl nodded slowly, her voice trembling as she recited the address. The officer jotted it down and radioed her team. Units are already en route, she said. We'll find her. The bus erupted in quiet murmurs, a mix of relief and lingering tension. The older woman reached over to pat the girl's shoulder. Your mommy's going to be okay, sweetheart, she said gently. But the girl didn't look convinced. She hugged her bear tighter, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. What if they hurt her like before? Charlie placed a reassuring hand on her small shoulder. They won't get away with this. Not while we're here. Outside, the suspects were being loaded into separate squad cars, their faces masks of anger and frustration. The taller man shot a glare at the bus, his lips moving silently as if cursing their interference. Stay focused, Charlie reminded himself, turning back to the passengers. We're all witnesses to what's happening here. Let's make sure justice is served. The bus began to feel like a haven, a collective of strangers united by the desperate need to protect one small, scared child. As they waited for news from the police, the little girl's quiet sobs filled the silence. Charlie leaned closer, his voice steady and kind. We're going to make sure you and your mom are safe, he said. That's a promise. The police convoy raced through the city streets, sirens wailing, as officers coordinated to reach the girl's home. Charlie sat on the bus steps, gripping the steering wheel tightly, his eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the frightened little girl in the seat behind him. The little girl hugged her stuffed bear closer, her small frame trembling as she stared out the window. Every passing second felt like an eternity, and her soft voice broke the tense silence. What if we're too late? Charlie turned to her, his voice calm but firm. We're not too late, sweetheart. They're going to help your mom. The older woman on the bus, who had been comforting the girl earlier, spoke up. The police are doing everything they can. Your mom is lucky to have such a brave little girl like you. The child offered a small, shaky smile, but her tears still flowed. As the minutes dragged on, the police radio crackled with updates. Officers approaching the location, came the voice of the lead officer. Be advised, the situation may involve armed suspects. Everyone on the bus tensed at the words. Charlie clenched his fists, praying silently for the safety of the girl's mother. At the girl's home, the officers arrived at the scene, a modest house with a dimly lit porch. The door hung ajar, and muffled sounds came from inside. The lead officer signaled her team, and they approached cautiously, guns drawn. Inside, the room was chaotic. Furniture was overturned, and a terrified woman was tied to a chair, her face bruised. Two men stood over her, shouting as she struggled. Police! Hands in the air! The intruders froze, panic flashing across their faces. One of them reached for something in his pocket, but an officer acted swiftly, pinning him to the ground. The other man surrendered immediately, raising his hands and stammering, "We didn't hurt her. We swear." The officers secured the suspects and untied the woman, who sobbed uncontrollably. "My daughter," she choked out. "Is she safe?" "She's safe," the officer reassured her. "She's with us, back on the bus." Charlie's heart lifted as the radio delivered the news. "The woman has been rescued. She's shaken but alive. Suspects are in custody." The passengers erupted in relieved cheers, and the little girl's eyes lit up for the first time. "My mommy's okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. Charlie smiled, his voice steady and warm. "She's okay. They found her, just like I promised." The bus came to a stop at the nearest police station, where officers helped reunite the little girl with her mother. The woman dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. Both of them wept openly, their relief palpable. "You're so brave," the mother whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "You saved me, baby." The little girl looked up at her, her eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared, Mommy. But Mr. Charlie and the nice people on the bus helped me." The mother turned to Charlie, her gratitude overwhelming. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped." Charlie waved her thanks away, his eyes misty. "It wasn't just me. Everyone here wanted to help. Your little girl is the real hero." The officers escorted the mother and daughter to safety, and the passengers slowly began to disembark. Each one felt the weight of what had happened, but also the satisfaction of knowing they had done something good. As Charlie sat alone in the driver's seat, the bus now empty, he reflected on the day's events. He knew he'd never forget the courage of that little girl or the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. He turned the ignition and began his route again, a small smile on his face. For the first time in years, Charlie felt truly proud of his job. Not just as a bus driver, but as someone who had made a real difference. The end.